set you free. What is this? How can I believe in it? Nobody there in who we can trust. Tell me please who made this choice for us. Silence outside the stars boxed in cage. It's like our deepest fears and now we're blind
sacrifice one or two. But we have projects here who say that they're trying to solve the blockchain trilemma. But based on what we just heard, everyone has slightly different approach, even though that we have the same end goal, right? So again, like Hedera Hashgraph has really focused on the governance because they think that building the trust is very important. Solana is focused on the performance scalability, and Elixir Prix6 is focused on the privacy, right? And Argren is focused on basically all three. So just wanna ask you, how do you approach this problem, and how your technology is superior than the others?
It's very good that there are different projects and we have to go. It's a very big opportunity for us, right? So a permissionless blockchain that secures and should secure trillions of assets is room for all the people on this table and other tables as well. So I think ourselves as colleagues, much more finding over superiority. But everybody has a different approach, and that is very good. So that because of something is maybe more useful in certain circumstances than others. So let me tell you where we are. So what is the trilemma? Trilemma, as famously put forward by Buterin, right, is to say you cannot have a blockchain that is simultaneously decentralized, secure, and scalable. Just imagine this were true. Okay, so I'm providing a provider of blockchains, you are a customer, oh, welcome to blockchain by design. So, what can I do for your blockchain? Which property you want to get rid of? So I want an insecure blockchain. Excellent, I have one just for you. So that doesn't work, right? So, and if you say that you don't care about decentralization, well, you want a blockchain. And if you don't care about scalability, well, you intend to use your blockchain for friends and family to interact? There are no good options in the trilemma. It's like if I told you, you prefer to be shot in the left knee or in the right knee. You go, thank you, I'm given the choice, I don't want to be shot at all. So, how do we, it is true that for a while, all these projects were having 2 out of the 3 of the property, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't possible. The way we approach it around is the following. We have decentralization comes from the fact that there is a block that is produced by 1,000 randomly selected users, okay? And it says, gee, the same 1,000 people randomly selected produce all blocks? No, one block, 1,000 users, different 1,000 users for the next block, different randomly selected user for the other block, right? He says, okay, who selects these users? Well, how about if I told you I do? That doesn't work. Right? So how about if I told you humanity gathers together and chooses these 1,000 people for each block, We all die before we agree on anything, let alone to 1,000 people committing. So at Argren we do something a little bit unorthodox. So we let these committee members select themselves randomly. I said, gee, that sounds a bad idea. Because if I'm dishonest, I select myself all the time. But what does it mean that I select myself randomly? It means that each one of us, in the privacy of our own laptop, run an individual lottery, and at the end of this lottery, you see, think about a slot machine that you can pull the lever only once. Okay, you pull the lever, if you win, you get a winning ticket, meaning a mathematical proof that you are won the lottery and you are part of the 1,000 people committee who will generate the next block. So if you do, what do? You propagate to the network, here is my winning ticket, listen to my opinion, and then here is my opinion about the block. Something like that. Okay, so Why is this fast? Because how long is the lottery? 1 microsecond. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, and if I win the lottery, what I should do? Oh, to propagate these 2 messages. Here's my winning ticket, and here's my winner about the block. Does this scale? Of course it scales. Now we can propagate, 1,000 people can propagate 2 short messages easily. How about the security? Because assume that I am a very bad guy, very powerful. I can corrupt just at the snap of my fingers any 1,000 people I want on earth. Whom I want to corrupt? The people in charge of producing my next block. I have a problem. I don't know whom I should corrupt. Right? Should I corrupt you, or should I corrupt this lady in Bangkok, or this other guy in Paris? I don't know. Because the winners are the winners of this lottery that I don't see is inside of your computer. Okay? But after the winners come forward and say, I won, here is the ticket and here is my opinion. Now I know who you are, and I can corrupt you right away, all of 1,000 of you. But what do I gain? Whatever you had to say, you already said it, and it's virally propagated over the network, and I do not have the power to put back in the bottle these virally propagated 1,000 messages, no more than the US government has the power to put back in the bottle a message virally propagated by WikiLeaks. So the system is secure because beforehand I don't know whom I should corrupt, and ex post is too late to corrupt. And that's actually the way we approach the challenge.
It was a really long but comprehensive answer, so I don't know how David is gonna follow up on that answer.
Okay, I can give it a shot.
Okay,
You want to start a timer?
How many? 3 minutes?
Yeah, 3 minutes. No, first I would agree. I think to me the trilemma is more of a description of a moment in time than any sort of fundamental constraint. I think we have a great deal of optimization to be done before. I mean, perhaps we will hit that, a fundamental constraint in this trilemma, but I don't think we're anywhere close personally right now. For Solana, we call ourselves a scale blockchain. And so Bitcoin was, I think, is the most famous example of how this is solved. Proof of work is a clock. In Satoshi's white paper, he says in order to create a distributed timestamp server, proof of work is the solution. And that's great. I think the only thing there is that proof of work ties consensus to the progression of the blockchain. So the Bitcoin clock ticks about once every 10 minutes, and so does the Bitcoin blockchain. For proof of stake, it gets a little more complicated, but generally the idea is the same, is that in order to agree on time and ordering of the messages that I see as an individual node, I generally have to talk to all my node buddies and say, hey, what did you see? What did you see? And then I take the median or something like that. The problem is, even describing that took a lot of communication overhead. That process takes time, and also you can't progress until you've all given the thumbs up, reached consensus. So Solana, if you've heard anything about us, you've heard the term proof of history. Proof of history is our solution to this problem. It's a clock that runs on each node that produces basically a verifiable way to order the transactions without having to chat with all my neighbor buddies. So I can proceed optimistically, and then consensus comes later. Maybe we can get into the details later, but for 3 minutes, I gotta stop.
Awesome, thank you.
I can go. So, I heard the two gentlemen. Seems like Hedera has I think everybody has properties that are similar, but essentially, what Hashgraph is a timestamping service. So while blockchains might focus on the immutability of the data itself, we focus on the timestamp. And how we do it, how we solve the blockchain trilemma is the consensus algorithm itself, the Hashgraph consensus algorithm. We gossip about transactions. Actually, we gossip about the history of transactions. And each transaction is attached with a timestamp, which is a receive timestamp. So when 2/3 of the network receive the transaction, then that is...
Computing is like, what are you going to use it for? Who's going to use it? Why? How, what's the effect on society? And so forth. So really, the whole reason we're here at a blockchain event is because computing power has reached such a tremendous level that we can afford to waste millions of computers just to do a simple thing. We have plenty of computing power, but what we found out is that it can be misused to subvert all the intentions and benefits of society. So the real question, Bitcoin does represent a very fundamental inflection point in computing, but it's not because of the particular approach to consensus or something of that sort. It's because it is outside the control of the powers that be. That is the thing that's really fundamentally different. That has changed everything. And so, fundamentally, the only real question that one should focus on is, okay, how can we make something that's outside the control of the powers that be, that returns control to individuals over their own informational lives? That has to do with money, and that has to do with privacy and what you might call credentials. And that is the problem that Electrum Praxis have actually found a solution to. If we can do those things at a performance and at a scale that's adequate to satisfy the needs of 10 billion people today, that's enough. So that's our perspective on what's needed, and it's we take a different approach and try to look at more holistically at the
Right, the proof of history. We heard about PPOS from Margaret. So, is there anything like the governance-wise? I know that.
As I mentioned, actually part of the biggest reason a finance background, I don't have a technical, not as distinguished as these gentlemen, but one of the biggest reasons that I joined this field is because this was a new and a very powerful way to sort of arrange society, right? There's problems going on, all around the world. In the U.S., is democracy the right way to governance? Is it an aristocracy? What is a democracy? What is the right way to arrange human behavior? And we're seeing, a lot of this movement, this decentralized movement, in my opinion, after the human crisis, has partially come out of, David was saying, how do you take this out of the control of the power to be? But the question that I have, and we're trying to answer also, is, okay, decentralization, right? In our view, so there's a step to it, it's not really possible to kind of go online and decentralize from day one, right? Slowly, you give the power away. Now, the way that we do it is, okay, we have a governing council, and then slowly grow it up to 39, and then eventually, give out the tokens, which are votes, and, 10 years down the road, originally we, sort of Hedera, built it, but in 10 years, it's sort of, we've given the baby up, essentially. So how is government, for example, right now the powers to be are you guys, right? Us, the people in the project. So how is the baby sort of, grown enough, and at what point would the baby be given, out to the public, into the real world? So I guess the question is the path to decentralization, how does each person think about achieving that?
You had to bring up the hard stuff. The tech is the easy part.
The governance is really the key, because we have different ways of achieving the same thing. But really, who decides when the code needs to be changed? Right? Who decides the pricing of the token? Who decides if it's not 1,000, it's actually 2,000? At the moment it's us, but eventually, how does that become truly decentralized? And how does that fit in with regulators, let's say, because laws change all the time. So, that's, and people, Bitcoin has a different approach, and so it'd be interesting to hear everybody's approach, or, it might be a philosophical answer. But.
Well, I guess in 79 or 82, however you want to count, I published the first article on electronic voting, on voting securely over a network. This was embedded in my master's thesis, and this article has been cited, like I read, like more than 5,000 times. That's the basis for an ongoing series of conferences that created a whole field of research. This was the mixing work, and subsequent to that, after the 2000 election meltdown in the U.S., I helped create a new scientific community focused on election integrity, and part of that was work that I did with one of Silvio's colleagues, Ron Rivest, a dear friend of both of ours, who, and a couple of other professors, and I organized the first publicly verifiable election. We did it for a city in the United States called Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is a portion of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And by invitation in 2009, and then again in 2011, we ran the municipal election for the city of Tacoma Park, including mayors and ballot questions and councilmen and the whole thing. And I paid for it, but the US government paid for the surveys of the voters. Every single voter was surveyed and asked an every third voter was asked an open-ended question and so forth. And it turned out the voters loved it, and they were quite satisfied with it. And the cost of doing it per ballot was a small fraction of a cent more than the cost of the piece of paper that the ballot was printed on. And in the United States, municipalities pay more than $1 per ballot, and they pay quite a lot for very special equipment, which has sort of special warehouses and so on. We used only off-the-shelf equipment that could be used for other purposes, so it was far less expensive. The voters loved it, and it was the only and the first publicly verifiable binding election. So you could look online and see the mathematical proof that the vote that you cast was actually counted correctly, but you would not be able to show anyone how you voted because of this technology that I have developed. And if you go to charm.com, you can read about it. You can see the training videos and the whole thing. And 4 people got their PhDs on the basis of it, and so on. It was a great thing, and who can guess what the reaction of election officials around the world was to this?
Actually agree on a block. Why do I tell you all that? Because if you look at this label, it's not a diluted process. Input, we want to agree on a block, discussion, block approved. Next block, next agreement, next block, next agreement. We have a general agreement process. On what do we agree on? On anything we want. So 99.9% of the time we agree on the next block. But we have the ability to agree on anything we want. In particular, how about a change of a protocol? Are we in favor or not? We agree on that. Or do we want to adopt a new monetary policy? We can adopt on that. By the way, we have a mechanism to implement governance. I want to be honest with you. This workhorse, this mechanism is not governance. It is a tool for governance. But governance is chosen by the people. So we must figure out how do we put the thing. So, and this is a social process. I have no better ideas than you have, and we should discuss maybe to see. But let me tell you what at least what I'm thinking about. And you see when the workhorse comes from. The workhorse doesn't solve.
Decision is how they make the decision. Now, in our case, for example, pricing or the roadmap, we have 39 companies that make the decision, whether it's to change the pricing or whatever in the platform. So, in one sentence, who chooses if things need to be changed, whether it's the platform or the consensus algorithm or code, in your case?
Practically, it's a foundation of representatives of all the participating.
It's a failed model. So like a better way to do it is to have a system that allows anyone to propose an issue and to have basically voting on the issues that will be put to the public vote. So it doesn't have the kind of inherent plutocracy aspect that these other systems have. You don't need a lot of money to try to get something on a ballot like we have in those few cases today in nation state governance that do actually allow ballot initiatives. I'd like to make another comment, but I look at, if you love the way government works today, then that's fine. But when you're starting to deal with something that has potentially a much greater complexity, which is all the different code updates, the type of governance that we have today is inadequate for it. So you need a kind of system that scales with the complexity and the size of blockchain. So modeling after current systems or modeling after corporate governance is probably not the way you want to go. And I'd like to mention one other thing though, because you see, democracy for the last couple hundred years has been based on the idea of secret ballot. None of the systems that we have in blockchain today allow for secret ballot, and moreover, blockchain itself can destroy secret ballot globally. If you can pay people, you can buy votes from people in other countries using digital currency, you can just kiss democracy goodbye. So what's actually needed is a voting system that allows what's called secret ballot. That means you cannot sell votes. The only known way to solve that is something that I invented, I'm sorry to have to say, but this is done with what we call decoy ballots. It's what we use in random sample voting. So anyone can get decoy ballots. They're indistinguishable in perpetuity from real ballots, and they
I want to hear more, to be honest, but because we have a limited time, I just need to listen to Silvio briefly, and then we need to go on to the next conversation.
I'm being brief. Okay, so guys, there is a lot. So we must dissect issues, make them small in order to talk to them deeply and solve them. So now we're going to say political democracy. Well, a blockchain is a cryptocurrency is not a political democracy. I'm sorry. If you want to do some of these tools, you can use them to implement politically. But if you have an economic system, it is only right that the people who have invested more and believe it more, they actually have a bit more to say how the money is going to be governed. Okay? So, are we going to export? And what do we do about democracy? That's a different problem. It's a political problem which has nothing to do with this. Is a cryptocurrency. Second of all, clarification number one. Clarification number two. David is absolutely right. If you want to vote, privacy is important. But I want to talk about something even earlier than privacy, which is whatever I think that Sami and Eric were discussing. We can vote with privacy and with decoy and the right way that David tells us to vote, but who chooses the damn topic? So that is the problem. That is the problem number one. Who puts the topic? Now, to the point that Sami was saying, it is going to be a path to decentralization. It can be decentralized. So my proposal would be, as long as there is a foundation and there is 3 people rotating, let these 3 people propose them. But guess what? Even in a traditional representative democracy that David despises, You know, people once in a while may figure, you know, those people in the government were elected for 4 years, they don't represent me. What you do have? You have a remedy, which is a referendum. You bypass everybody, and you do you propose a referendum.
저는 엘리베이터 강남석 전문이고요. 저희가 하고 있는 사업은 통신, 이동통신이라는데요. 가장 저희 사업을 쉽게 이해할 수 있는 방법은 그냥 이동통신의 우버나 에어비앤비라고 생각하시면 됩니다. 저희는 플랫폼 사업을 하고 있고 그 플랫폼에는 이동통신을 사용하는 사용자하고 이동통신망을 제공하는 제공자가 있는데 그 사용자와 수요와 공급 사이에서 저희도 플랫폼을 만들어서 참여하는 사람들이 모두 혜택을 볼 수 있게 그런 서비스를 제공하고 있고요. 그럼 저희가 그런 플랫폼을 할 수 있는 일의 가장 핵심적인 것은 무엇이냐 하면 그 망을 제공하는 제공자들의 그 이동통신망을 가장 효율적으로 매시업해서 엮어서 가격을 따온 원가를 절감하고 거기에 나오는 혜택과 부가가치를 그 소비자에게 사용자한테 돌려주는 그런 사업 모델을 전개하고 있습니다. 그러면 이 안에서 그런 블록체인 기술이 어떻게 쓰이느냐 하면 저희가 하는 사업 내용의 기술이 전부 블록체인이라고 말할 수는 없고 기존에 있던 이동통신의 그 엔지니어링 기술이 70~80%가 저희들이 그 기술을 갖고 와서 활용을 하고 있는 거고 나머지 한 30%를 블록체인 기술이라고 말씀드릴 수 있는데 예를 들어서 사용자가 전화를 걸 때 항상 이동통신 그 서버를 통해 가지고 사용자 유연성이 검증되고 가급이 되고 하는 중앙 집중적인 그런 현재 그 하이어러키를 분산화시키는 그 과정에서 블록체인 기술이 사용되고 있습니다.
알뜰폰 시장이요.
알뜰폰 시장은 하나의 네트워크 공급자죠. 그러니까 저희는 그런 공급자가 좀 길게 말씀드릴 것 같아서 하는데 이 안에서 우리가 사용할 수 있는 마음 굉장히 많거든요. 그 중에 하나가 알뜰폰이라고 생각하시면 됩니다.
네, 프레시움의 김한석입니다. 저희는 일단 현재 인플루언서 마케팅 사업을 진행하고 있던 회사였고요. 이제 그 인플루언서 마케팅 및 그리고 그 인플루언서 구매 관련한 이 플랫폼을 출시를 하면서 어떻게 하면은 이 플랫폼 구성원들이 조금 더 투명한 거래를 할 수 있는지 집중을 하려고 저희 이제 프로젝트가 시작이 되었고요. 간단하게 말씀드리면 저희 플랫폼에 참여자는 3가지가 있어요. 그래서 물건을 공급해주는 브랜드들이 있고, 그다음에 그 물건을 판매해주는 인플루언서들이 있고, 그다음에 그 물건들을 직접 인플루언서들이 구매를 하는 구매자들이 있어요. 그래서 현재 이 3개가 블록체인 상에서 돌아가고 있는 건 아니고요. 현재 저희가 저번 2달 정도 지난 이제 플랫폼에 출시를 한 이 플랫폼에서 돌아가고 있는데, 사실 이 공동구매라는 것이 우리가 인플루언서들에게 물건을 이제 구매를 하면은 얼마가 인플루언서에게 돌아가고 또 얼마가 공급자에게 돌아가고 또 우리는 얼마나 할인을 하는지에 대한 것들이 되게 불투명한 게 지금까지 시장이 형성되어 있는데 이런 것들을 좀 더 투명하게 관리하고 또 거기서 이제 불이익을 당하지 않는 사람들이 생겨나게끔 하려고 프로젝트를 진행하고 있습니다.
그리고 이들이 테크놀로지 부분에는 특히 모바일 어플리케이션을 활용한 그런 페이먼트라든가 시스템 부분에는 굉장히 익숙하지만은 블록체인이가 어떤 특정 테크놀로지다라는 거에 대해서는 솔직히 말하면 그렇게 익숙지 않습니다. 그래서 저희의 가장 중점적인 유저 어퀴지션 전략은 기술이 저희 플랫폼에 그리고 저희 서비스에 적용되어 있지 어떻게 활용되는지에 대해서 모르게끔 유저 프렌들리한 익스피리언스를 제공하는 것이 가장 큰 중점 전략 중에 하나고요. 다른 하나는 저희 서비스를 이용하는 저희 APM 생태계 참여자들에게 독점적인 베네핏을 제공함으로써 자발적으로 저희 서비스를 사용할 수 있게끔 하는 것이 저희 유저 어퀴지션 전략 중에 하나입니다.
이제 그 유저들을 끌어들이는 방법을 흔히 블록체인 하시는 프로젝트 하는 분들이 얘기를 하면 마케팅적으로 많이 말씀을 하시는 것 같아요. 그리고 어떻게 유스 케이스를 많이 만들어서 어떻게 유저가 인센티브를 살 것인가라는 관점에서 말씀하시는데 저도 조금 근본적으로 다른 관점에서 말씀드릴게요. 그러니까 다른 블록체인 프로젝트를 비교하는 게 아니고 기존에 이동통신 사업하는 사업자와 어떻게 저희가 차별화해서 유저 애퀴지션을 할 수 있는가를 말씀드리자면 일단 이동통신은 누구나 현대인이 반드시 사용할 수 있는 생활 필수품 같은 것이기 때문에 일단 가격이 낮아야 된다는 거죠. 그게 가장 유저들을 끌릴 수 있는 유인책이 되는 것이고 제가 아까 잠깐 말씀드렸지만 저희가 갖고 있는 이동통신의 기술의 메셔 엔지니어링이라고 가격이 높은 망도 있고 낮은 망도 있고 예를 들어 와이파이 같은 건 되게 가격이 낮죠. 원가 보조가 굉장히 낮기 때문에 그런 망들을 섞어서 전체를 하나로 묶었을 때 전체적인 원가를 다운시켜서 그 혜택을 소비자한테 즉 이동통신 사용자한테 줄 수 있는 그런 그 비즈니스 모델을 만드는 것 자체가 저희들 가장 유저들을 끌어줄 수 있는 큰 어떤 팩터라고 생각하고 그 외에도 뭐 여러 가지 많은데 저희는 이제 소프트웨어 기반이에요. 그래서 심 카드가 없어도 되는 그러니까 구글 플레이 그 플레이 스토어에서 소프트를 다운로드 받으시면 되거든요.
이거는 직접 구매해 가시는 분들이 저희의 유저들이거든요. 그런데 그 저희의 유저 베이스는 어떻게 되어 있냐면 저희 소속으로 되어 있는 200여 명의 인플루언서 분들의 팔로워들이 결국에는 저희 잠재적 고객님들이 되시는 상황이에요. 그래서 뭐 결과적으로 우리가 유저를 많이 확보를 하려면 저희가 더 많은 인플루언서 분들을 저희 플랫폼으로 유입을 시키고 그분들에게 딸려있는 그 팔로워들 지금 저희 모 회사인 킹센트에 저희 자체적으로 12개의 브랜드를 가지고 있어요. 저희가. 그래서 현재는 저희 브랜드만으로 지금 저희 플랫폼을 돌리고 있는 상황이거든요. 근데 이제 이 플랫폼이 잘 돌아가고 여기에서 수익이 난다면은 결국에는 외부 브랜드들도 저희 플랫폼에 참여할 수밖에 없게 될 거거든요. 그래서 앞으로 더 많은 외부 브랜드들을 저희 플랫폼 속에 유입시키고 또 더 좋은 인플루언서 분들을 모셔서 많은 팔로워분들을 확보해서 물건을 이렇게 투명하게 팔 수 있는 그런 플랫폼이 되었습니다.